Well, in the meantime, as it is said there, today is a World Tourism Day. And of course, the theme for this year is tourism for inclusive growth. Interestingly, because Cote d'Ivoire is the host for this year's event, and we hope to have our correspondent there, John Mekwa, join us in the course of this program to bring us up to speed with the issues and development there as the world celebrate tourism. And of course, from tourism development to human capital development, human capital is said to be the central driver of sustainable growth and poverty reduction. The World Bank, in its 2020 Human Capital Index, recently released, ranked Nigeria 0.36 points in its Human Capital Development Index, indicating 0.01 basis points compared to 0.35 recorded in 2018, putting the country in the low human development category. But can Nigeria really do better than this? Let's have this conversation with the Executive Director at the Africa Youth Growth Foundation, Dr. Arome Salifu. Good morning, Dr. Salifu. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Good morning. My pleasure to be with you.
Now, oftentimes, a lot of people argue about the criteria deployed by the World Bank in coming up with reports such as the Human Capital Index. What's your own opinion about these reports?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to share my position with you on the reports. First and foremost, the World Bank Human Capital Development Index report often deploy universal best practices and methodology to arrive at any conclusion. And of course, it's uniform, it's actually universal and it's uniform to all the countries concerned. And so there's no opportunity whatsoever for misinterpretation or ambiguity. The report released again shows the level at which Nigeria is performing in terms of human capital development. Human capital development basically measures the level of investment and, of course, improvement of the population in terms of the knowledge, in terms of the skill, and the health acquired over time or experienced or exposed to over time. In the case of Nigeria, the performance has really been on the decline for various and several factors that are well known to us. I think at this point in time, there's need to actually accelerate development in the area of human capital. We cannot, again, overemphasize the importance of human capital development and its implications to our national development, our national growth, and of course, even our competitiveness, both economic and of course, social competitiveness, both at the African level and of course, at the global level. So it's quite unfortunate that Nigeria is currently having this decline in terms of the measurement of human capital development. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, looking at the 2020 report, which is the latest released by the bank, it noted that much of the hard-won human capital gains in many economies over the past decade is at risk of being eroded by COVID-19 pandemic. And just last week, the National Bureau of Statistics, in collaboration with the UNDP, released a report on the impact of COVID-19 on the economy, saying that 20% of full-time workforce in Nigeria lost their jobs as a result of COVID-19. How would you tie these two reports together?
Yes, the two reports are complementary and they are basically saying the same thing differently and of course at different levels. If you reflect on the impact of COVID-19 on the economy and of course on the population, you would realize the fact that the impact is better imagined. For example, almost all the sectors were totally shut down. From hospitality, tourism, hospitality sector to transport sector, to industries, almost virtually every sector, was completely shut down, and that of course has significant implications, on the the level of productivity and, of course, engagement of the people to be able to move and to do what they are supposed to do on daily and routine basis. So it's not surprising to get the report that well over 20% of jobs, lost in the, as a result of COVID-19. Of course, we're already trying to recover, and we hope that the recovery process would be accelerated, through appropriate measures by the government and other actors to see that the people are not unduly exposed to further hardship and difficulties as a result of COVID-19. But again, I want to say this, that globally, the measures being put in place to see that every sector is being reactivated accordingly should be adopted and deployed also in Nigeria. The level of vaccination in Nigeria currently to open the doors for people to go back to their normal businesses as quickly as possible is not quite encouraging in Nigeria. We still have shortage, and of course, even people having misinterpretation as regards the efficacy or otherwise or safety of the vaccines. And so I think it's important to really, deploy all necessary, platforms and avenues to enlighten the people to actually accept, and accommodate the vaccines, and to see that beyond just being able to resume or to recover quickly in Nigeria, but that Nigerians are able to also connect, with the rest of the world as quickly as possible in terms of the recovery process. Yeah.
Now, the World Bank report calls for urgent action, particularly among the poor and vulnerable. And for a country such as Nigeria with limited fiscal space and competing priorities, what policy choices would you advocate to improve human capital in Nigeria?
Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have a very difficult situation in our hands as a country. This is actually describable such that we ought not to be in this position if we had gotten our leadership right, for many years, in retrospection. We missed it severally, as a country. For instance, human capital development is orchestrated on the basis of your investment, in the educational sector, in the health sector, and how that has also helped to translate to improve skills and knowledge of the people, and how they have been able to earn better income and be able to support themselves, their families, to have better living conditions as a result. That, has over the years been relegated. Our level of investment in education, for example, has been deplorable. Just to give specific instance, our budget, for some time now has not, grown beyond 7% of the total budget, given to educational sector. And you want to imagine, how you want to, grow your human capital with that level of investment or commitment, from the government side. And just comparable, you cannot compare that to Ghana, for instance. Ghana with a population of how many millions? And then Ghana is having a much higher level of, investment in education, compared to Nigeria that has population of over 200 million people. And then you also want to reflect on the fact that our population is growing, but the level of investment in our population is not there's no connection, between the level of our population growth and the investment in human capital development. We have currently over 13 million Almajiris out there on the street, 13 million. So you want to ask, what is the government position and how have they been able to prioritize, educational development, for this population? Because, if you talk of human capital development, it begins, its foundation from even nutrition for kids, for children, and if you have Almajiris on the street, they struggle on themselves, on their own to feed on daily basis. So nutritional wise, they are already, on the deficit. And then you also recognize the fact that with bad nutrition or with deficit nutrition, their cognitive power becomes depleted drastically. So their ability to recognize, their ability to understand, their ability to comprehend, their ability to be able to interpret analysis, and of course different kind of academic engagement will become even more difficult, if at all they are even opportunity to be in school. So in terms of the connection between human capital development, nutrition, and educational performance. All of these are linked. And then you also want to reflect on the fact that even for those who are able to go to school, how many of them are able to finish primary school? How many of them are able to finish secondary school? How many of them are able to go to university? Out of those who are able to go to university, how many of them have access to quality education in terms of training, in terms of teaching and learning environment? And then you have all manner of challenges that are befalling our educational system that is better imagined than what I don't know, that you have a system that you don't have conducive learning environment, you don't have conducive teaching environment, the level of infrastructures are completely defaced, and yet there's no declaration of state of emergency in this sector, and then you cannot be competitive out there in terms of labor market job and other areas of opportunities. Again, you also have to look at the fact that even for the numbers that are in the university or in the higher institution, there's huge mismatch between what they read and what is likely to be needed out there in the labor market. Currently, we have about 68% job graduate mismatch. What that means is that you have over 68% of Nigerian graduates graduating without corresponding job opening or opportunities for them in the labor market. So they struggle on their own just to do anything whatsoever, to just have something to eat or have something on the table. That is not supposed to be. Where there is connection between industry and the educational sector, you have to also see that whatever priority you are giving in terms of learning or courses that you expose the students to are on the basis of the demand generated by the labor system or by the labor sector or the job market. So you have this huge gap contributing to the gulf already created by the COVID-19 and of other structural unemployment and out there long before now. So you need to have a system that can feed the educational sector with appropriate data, with appropriate information as regards the kind of skill needed, the kind of knowledge needed currently in the labor market, so that the educational sector can respond accordingly to also design those courses and make sure that the students are enrolling in these courses, so that the students, as they are graduating, there's already a pool of job opportunities for them to to tap into. That is not done as we speak in Nigeria. All of this put together aggravate the current level of deficit we have, in our employment sector. I mean, in terms of employment generation, poverty reduction, and so on.
Right. You've spoken so much, about the education sector, of course, which is part of what the report highlighted, talking about the current education and, of course, health outcomes, how it's going to shape the productivity of the next generation. But we would also like to have your thoughts on how you think the private sector can actually contribute to this. But we'll do that after the break.
Okay.
Welcome back. You're still watching Business Morning on Channels Television, and we're looking at human capital development in Nigeria, and we'll still have Dr. Arome Salifu, Executive Director at Africa Youth Growth Foundation. Thank you very much, Dr. Salifu, for sticking on. Yes, we're talking about how the private sector can actually support. You did mention education, and of course, health is also important. These are the two key factors that the World Bank report highlighted that the outcome of these would shape the productivity of the next generation. So how can the private sector contribute to both education and health?
The private sector remains the engine room of any economy. They serve as the major drivers of economic growth, and they also serve as enablers, of employment generation and poverty reduction. Within the context of this conversation, I would recommend strongly that the level of information sharing is not encouraging enough between the government and the private sector, and also that not sufficient to guarantee shared responsibility between the government and the private sector. We have very boisterous private sector in Nigeria. The private sector account for significant, volume of GDP and of the other related outputs, in the country. And so the private sector in Nigeria remains very critical in terms of how best to contributing to development of human capital, employment generation, and of course poverty reduction. Now, you look at the private sectors, importantly as, being on the demand side of the entire, conversation, because essentially the private sector would be interested in the quality of people they have to hire, the ability of these persons to be able to deliver on their expectations, and of course to be able to justify whatever payment they are giving to these persons in terms of the output and the level of performance on the job. And so the private sector is more business-minded as compared to the government sector. But this is actually one important aspect of their responsibility to see that as a country, we do not have undue unemployment, leading to high level of insecurity, instability, in the country, thereby making even their own business environment very difficult to operationalize or to be able to dwell. So it's important, perhaps, that the government, partners strongly with the private sector to, one, generate the appropriate data needed to support government planning. For example, we have industries, we have companies, they have specific numbers of persons they need to be able to produce a certain volume of goods or services, as the case may be. And where they have deficits, where they have gaps, these gaps should be, reported and, to the government, to allow the government to plan accordingly or respond accordingly, both in terms of policy, in terms of other possible interventions. And of course, they also need to see to how they could, express their challenges to the government. For example, under COVID-19, in several, climes, governments are really, coming up with a lot of interventions, for the private sector to recover quickly and to be able to facilitate, job recovery, in these companies. And so Canada to US to UK, they are giving out, a lot of resources to the private sector, to the companies to be able, one, to keep jobs that are on their payroll, and two, to also be able to, even generate new, jobs for those that are not even employed before COVID-19. So these kind of interventions are needed locally in Nigeria also. I know Nigeria, as a country, the government is doing its best possible to see that private sector is supported, to see that the jobs that are currently being handled by Nigerians are retained, and that new jobs are also created for potential new employees of these companies. However, I think it's just like a drop in the ocean. If you want to interrogate the level of interventions, by the government and the performances of these interventions in the last 1 or 2 years, you want to agree with me that it's not, performing, the way and manner we all anticipate that these interventions perform to quickly, support and accelerate job recoveries and, of course, poverty reduction among the people. Maybe perhaps the level of corruption also not helping matters, because it's one thing to have good intention, it's another thing to see this good intention through and to see that they are properly deployed and actualized, as expected. So we have a pocket of challenges here and there as a country that also make the private sector pretty difficult to do what they are supposed to do, to be able to be on the same page, in terms of government, priorities and interests. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Salifu, for sharing your thoughts with us this morning on the program. Well, let's just hope we get it right eventually. Dr. Arome Salifu is the Executive Director at Africa Youth Growth Foundation.